Robinson. I work for Derby City Council, and Derby City Council has helped create something called Derby Climate Community Hub. And this is the second meeting of the Community Hub. We felt the need to reach out to people and involve you as much as possible. Behind the scenes, Derby Climate Coalition has had a hand in setting up the Community Hub. And I just recognize the ambivalence of this. So it's played a leading role, but we've pulled in a number of people as well. Sonia, our chair, or supposed chair, is one of them. She's from the Mandela Center. We've got one or two councillors on this meeting, and we've got people from Community Action. Our speakers are as follows. Kierra, who's from Friends of the Earth, and she's a specialist on this bill, and she'll talk for 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to have Paul, who works for Community Action, but he's particularly involved in the foods program, the Sustainable Foods program, and he'll talk about that for about 5 minutes. Then we will have questions, and obviously put questions up in the chat. If you want to ask a question live, which we much prefer hearing your voices, but put in the chat hat, and Greg, who'll be watching this with these eagle eyes, he'll be watching this and he'll prompt me, or if Sonia's managed to get in as a chair, Sonia to. We'll ask the speakers to come in with some of the questions, and we'll ask them to sum up at the end. There's also one other thing I want to mention. I can't see if Kate's on this, but we're also going to be using this opportunity to launch a survey, which we're trying to get through to at least 1,000 people about what sort of city we want to live in, and various questions. And that's really, really important. We're using this meeting to launch that. So we'll do that before the very end. And at the very end, we'll have announcements as well. After the speakers have summed up, we've got announcements. Perhaps you could just put up in the chat the announcement so that we can manage it. So this is great. And I can't emphasize how important this bill is. And we need to be on our feet, looking at the strengths and the weaknesses. And hence we've asked Kierra from Friends of the Earth to speak, and welcome Kierra. Could everybody give her, even though you're muted, give her a clap. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Peter. Good evening, everyone. Oh, beautiful use of the clapping emoticon thing there as well. So yeah, I mean, I have 20 minutes, but I suppose I'll try and rattle through this really, and then see if there are areas that anyone is interested in more details in. Partly because I have a tendency to go on for quite a while. This is a huge bill, the Environment Bill, and it contains so much that I really could do you a full hour going through it and still not even cover half of what it does and half of what it could and should do. But just a bit of background. So the Environment Bill originally was introduced to Parliament a ridiculously long time ago, the end of 2018, and there'd been a consultation before that. It came in, it hung around for a while, nothing really happened, it didn't really progress. It finally started to move through Parliament at the beginning of 2020. The pandemic hit, it was put on pause. It resumed its progress through the House of Commons in kind of September time. It reached finally report stage, which is the last bit in the House of Commons before it goes to the Lords at the end of January, and then it was paused again. So it's been a very long process, and through that time the bill has got bigger and bigger, so more and more things have been added to it, actually mainly not by campaigners and not by other groups, but by the government itself. So the bill began aiming to basically fill a lot of the gaps that were left by Brexit. So I'll go into this in more detail in a bit, but essentially the bill aimed to set out some governance structures which would ensure that the legal system for environmental protections and the enforcement system around it all worked properly after EU exit. Obviously, we're a little bit late for that now, but this is part of the delay of the bill. So one of the key points of the bill in the beginning was to bring in an environmental watchdog to take the place of the European courts. That's still coming in as part of the bill, but obviously we'll have left Europe for about a year by the time that comes in. So just it's important to know that there are some big gaps that this bill is filling that will have been in place since we left Europe and since the transition period ended. And a lot of this is in announcements that might feel a bit like deja vu to you, because you'll have heard them before and you might be shocked that they haven't gone through Parliament yet. And that's kind of why. So just to take you through some of the, I suppose, the government headline clauses then of the bill. And these are mainly the ones that came in actually not for that main reason of making the Environment Bill in the first place, not for the reason of filling the gaps left by Europe, but because government needed a vehicle for a lot of other environmental legislation, lots of other things they wanted to do, and this was a good place to bring those together. So on plastics, which is one of a campaign focus for Friends of the Earth, it brings in charges for single-use plastic items, or at least it brings in the ability for the minister to now make secondary legislation to bring in charges for single-use plastic items. So this is going beyond the carrier bag charge. This is things like making the carrier bag charge more expensive and more extensive, moving on to other items like cotton buds and stirrers, even provisions to begin to try and phase out some of those products entirely. But the bill is a little bit unclear about exactly what will happen there. And so we know that the minister has a lot of power to do things, but the bill isn't entirely clear beyond the headlines we've seen in the media about exactly what will come out at the other end. But it's still really useful. And if anyone is hugely excited by reading legislation, by the way, that's clause 54, apparently, according to my notes. Staying on the plastics theme, there's also the deposit return scheme. So this was originally announced, I think, also about 2.5, 3 years ago, maybe. So powers for ministers to put in place regulations to get a deposit return scheme for some kind of bottles. And those of you who follow government consultations might have noticed a deposit return scheme consultation launched, I think, a few days ago. It's open till the beginning of June, and effectively that's asking kind of what kind of bottles could be covered by the scheme suggested in the Environment Bill. So should it be plastic? Should it be all kinds of materials? Should they not do it? Should it be for countrywide? Should it be England only? There are some other decisions that are being made about that as well. So in the Environment Bill, there is the power for ministers to put in place a deposit return scheme. But actually, if anyone's really excited by deposit return schemes, probably the key thing to do right now is to go and find the consultation and respond to it. We probably have some further points on that. It's hugely delayed. So if you are responding to the consultation, saying that the consultation proposes the return scheme won't come in until 2024, given how delayed the bill already is, that seems pretty unacceptable. So that might be a useful thing to raise in a consultation. And also, I think if I was given the choice, and if Friends of the Earth was given the choice, we'd say choose the option around an all-in deposit return scheme. Plastic is very important, but if we're going to put in place the mechanisms and the systems that allow us to use less resources and to reuse them more efficiently, then we should be including plastics, glass, aluminium, cartons, and we shouldn't be limiting it according to the size of container, which is another proposal. And in fact, Scotland has already done a number of those things. Just a small note, by the way, on our plastics campaign. One thing we are noting about the bill is that all the work in the bill to promote recycling is great. All the work in the bill to talk about reuse is really useful, and to talk about resource efficiency is really useful, but reduction is still ignored. So we have been calling throughout the process of the Environment Bill for one of the targets set in the bill, I'll come on to targets, to be around overall plastics reduction. So the reduction of the amount of plastics we bring into the supply chain in the first place. And we think we really need system change here that is turning off the tap, because you can't stop a bath overflowing purely by kind of bailing out the top. You need to stop water getting into that vessel in the first place, and that's our argument on plastics. To move on to a couple of other things in the bill, there are provisions on food waste, so to ensure that food waste collections are weekly. There are some other provisions on other kinds of recycling and collection, and to try and increase the frequency of collections and standardize them. And there's something called a biodiversity net gain requirement that's brought in for future development, which is essentially about ensuring that when people build, if they break or damage the environment anyway, they have to fix it, and they have to ensure that overall there is a net gain to biodiversity and to nature and to environmental outcomes. Something I would say in the bill, that's quite a nice thing to bring in. I think that we'd always say government could go further, but developers often, we know, kind of trample all over nature, and we might say sometimes skirt the requirements and the environmental impact assessments that are there to protect the natural world. So having this provision in the bill is really important. However, at the moment it's limited to developers proving they can provide net gain for 30 years. I don't know about you, but I've seen a number of developments where they look beautiful at the beginning, they plant a lot of trees, and then immediately 2 years later, no one has watered those trees, they weren't planted correctly, and they've gone to dust. I don't think we want that approach for future development. So we're looking to remove that 30-year limitation and ask developers to prove how they're going to maintain that net gain into the future in perpetuity. So I think those initially were some of the main government announcements in the bill, and there was one final big government announcement that came in when the bill came back to Parliament just before Christmas last year, and that was a due diligence mechanism. And what that basically means is, sorry, there are motorbikes going past my house. What that basically means is it's a requirement that companies must not, in their supply chain, contribute to environmental damage in the form, in this case, of deforestation. So the idea is that companies shouldn't be selling us meat that was grown on deforested land, which is great. But the way the Environment Bill limits it, and the way that the government has phrased it in there, is illegal deforestation. And we're really concerned about that, because when you look at how rainforest and savanna are managed in Brazil, for example, and when you look at the lack of laws and the lack of enforcement of those laws, in a way, anything goes and anything is legal. And we shouldn't be trumpeting in this bill a great advancement and a great gold standard piece of progress on ensuring that the things we buy don't damage the environment elsewhere in the world, if all we're doing is asking companies to behave legally, which should not be celebrated, that should just be expected, and B, behave legally according to laws which in many places do not protect the environment adequately. So I think that's a really interesting bit of the bill just to be aware of, because it's quite new, and some of the headlines about it maybe don't entirely reflect how limited it is and how far those provisions could go in the future. And then finally, to move on actually to the bit that was the meat of the bill in the beginning. So to remind you, the Environment Bill establishes an environmental watchdog. It's called the Office of Environmental Protection, or for Environmental Protection. As I say, it should have been in place on January the 1st this year. There is currently an Interim Environmental Governance Service, IEGS. It is a catchy title. And they are the people you can complain to if you feel that the government in this country or your local authority is not upholding environmental law. So they've made a decision which actually goes against laws and protections we already have in this country. In the same way you could complain in the past to the European courts about environmental concerns you had, which is what, for example, Client Earth did with us a few years ago when we complained about the government not taking action on air quality. And the European courts forced government here to make air quality plans as a result of that. So that's what we're trying to replace. If you have a concern right now, Google IEGS and you can find the interim service and you can raise a complaint with them and it will take you through a process. However, the bill brings in the OEP, hopefully from January the 1st next year. The government has already tried to take steps to get over the delay. So they've appointed an interim chair and many other things. But still, to summarise, the watchdog is too weak, it's not independent enough, and it lacks access to the proper range of legal remedies that used to be available to the European courts. There are many, if anyone is a lawyer and is excited by ranges of legal remedies, I can talk about how the remedies in it are not as good as judicial review, but effectively, I can also send you very long legal documents about why they're not, but they're not as good. And so we're quite concerned and we're looking to amend the bill before it gets royal assent at the end of the year. Secondly, the bill is setting out how the government will deal with the legal principles that underpin a lot of environmental law in this country. So things like the precautionary principle, which has been used to ban dangerous pesticides in the past, or the polluter pays principle, which is basically the root of all that plastics legislation I just talked you through, or the rectification at source principle, which means that we don't let pollution get all over the country before we deal with it. We try and deal with it before it's left the producer. Those are legal principles that have always been something we could rely on in court and have always underpinned how European legislation is made. That is no longer true due to Brexit. And so the bill sets out that we will still apply the principles in this country, but we will do so through the means of a principles policy statement. I think this is really worrying because the principles, and again, I'm not going to go into the details, but they used to apply directly through the law. They now apply through a piece of policy guidance, which is a much much weaker legal form, and it is also much more confusing. And it also provides the government the opportunity to, in that principles policy statement, redefine the principles and apply them slightly differently to how they've been applied in the past, which could lead to different decisions. It could mean a pesticide is not banned in the future in the same way it would have been previously. To bring you right up to date on this one, the principles policy statement went out for consultation again a couple of weeks ago. The consultation's open until the beginning of June, and you can read for yourself what we think is a heavily caveated, heavily loopholed principles statement that could actually be really ambitious and could look at embedding these foundations of law more firmly than they ever have been before, but instead is a bit kind of mealy-mouthed about it. And finally, the bill sets out a framework of binding 15-year targets in air, biodiversity, resource use, and water, which is great. I love binding targets. I enjoy environmental ambition, and I think a long-term vision is great. However, there's also a framework set out in the bill of environmental improvement plans, which will be produced every 5 years to kind of review progress and think about new things we want to do. The first of those is the 25-year environment plan that already exists. But there aren't any binding interim targets for those 5-year periods. So we can't hold government to account on every single one of those plans. We have to wait for 15 years, which seems like a pretty long way down the line. And we don't know exactly what the targets are going to be in those 4 areas. So as I said before, we can't guarantee the resource use target will include plastic or will include reducing resources we use rather than just recycling them. On the detail of the bill, Greener UK is a coalition of organisations who are working to influence on that. So it's Friends of the Earth, it's WWF, RSPB, the Wildlife Trusts, etc., etc. If you go to greeneruk.org/briefings, I'll put the link in the chat in a bit. There are a huge range of briefings on everything we work on, but there's also a whole category there on environment bill briefings from every stage of the bill. So you can read in as much or as little detail as you want. So I suppose I'll just end by kind of saying that government want to get this through before COP now, before the climate change talks at the end of the year. This is going to be their big showcase, special, exciting thing. And we'd like to make it something special and exciting that they can shout about. But what we don't want to do is allow it to be not special and shouted about. So if it is not going to be special, then we need to make everyone aware that this is not the bill it could have been. But preferably, we have the next day of report stage sometime at the end of May, hopefully. And hopefully through that time, and as the bill goes through the Lords, we'll see some amendments to really pick up on some of those big overarching areas. And we'll see a little bit more dedication to getting the whole shebang through pretty quickly and acting on it as fast as they can. And now I will shut up. That's been much longer than I meant to be, sorry.
Peter, you got it.
Okay. Kierra, you were perfect in timing, and thank you ever so much. And we'll have Paul talk for a bit, and then could people please put up questions in the chat, but we do also want them, or put up hat, and so that they can ask questions. There'll be opportunities for Kierra and Paul to answer as we go along to some extent, but also I want as many questions as possible, and they'll be able to sum up at the end. But that was very useful, thank you. And I know you could have talked, and we could have heard you for a much longer time, but there's always, as always, a balancing act to be done. So Paul, welcome. Introduce yourself and fire away.
Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Paul Ruckhouse. I'm the project manager of Derby Food for Thought Alliance, which only officially became that name in June of last year. But on the back of the pandemic last March, we got asked as a steering group of the Food Forum to collectively come together and ensure the supply and demand was kind of covered for the city, which I'm sure you can imagine has been a hectic 12 months, and just overseeing and just supporting, just so you kind of know, we're averaging approximately about 2,500 food parcels currently at the minute a month, just to kind of support people and working alongside that. But it's been amazing how kind of collectively, everyone has come together from all sectors. Community Action kindly has allowed Food for Thought to become kind of under the banner of Community Action, which has made it a lot simpler. And I'm currently seconded into Community Action until Thursday, when I officially become an employee of Community Action. And so it's just been really important, kind of ensuring that, food banks collectively all work together in the same way. I'm sure you can imagine that a lot of different projects, run in a lot of different ways. And my biggest concern was that if people live in certain parts of the city, that they don't get the same support as they do in other parts of the city, depending which service they access. And so it's been really crucial. And some of the key things around that has been around some of the donations, as well as the issue around food waste. And sometimes food waste has driven the agenda rather than actually the need of access and support. And because of naturally the concern, we don't want any food to get thrown in the bin. Sometimes organizations will just kind of say, we've got all this food, just come and take whatever you want, and not really ask any questions, which isn't always the most effective way moving forward to best support people. Because the key thing we say under Food for Thought is that food isn't the answer to people's poverty and deprivation. It's only one part of the solution. And the major solution is ensuring that people get the long-term support to tackle the root cause of what's going on in their situation, which often is multi-complex and very challenging and very deep. And having worked in communities for scarily now since I was 19, so 27 years, you see that situations in people's lives get a lot more complex as time goes on. So that simply is what Food for Thought is about. One of the key things we wanted to do is move away from food banks and move towards community shops. I'm also looking at an idea that we're worked alongside in Middlesbrough. They're about eco shops, which are based in primary schools that people can access. And I haven't got time to kind of go into detail about both of them. The key difference is a community shop is very much focused on food deprivation and food poverty. An eco shop is very much focused on tackling food waste. And as part of as all this has been developing, there's been a subgroup that Peter is a part of, where we've kind of been looking at this thing called a membership to what's called the Soil Association. And as part of that, there's kind of two things. You get the membership, which kind of gives you like a kite mark and potentially access to funding. But one of the key things they ask is for people to establish what's called a sustainable food charter. And we've been working on that. And one of the key points under that is all around the environmental and ecological impact of food waste. And so one of my big kind of concerns is, as people travel many a mile to take all these donations of food from supermarkets at the end of the days and first thing in the morning, they might be stopping food being thrown in the bin, but they're not necessarily doing the best for the carbon footprint. And there's national organisations that take food from Derby and it goes to distribution warehouses in Nottingham, or it goes to ones further afield, and then we have to request for a share of that food, and then it has to be brought back to Derby for us to access. And so for me, I think there's a real thing of, and it's one of the things I'm wanting to look at once I've had a week off and got my brain working again, is around how do we come up with a good structure in ensuring food isn't wasted, but also making sure we're not damaging the carbon footprint at the same time of accessing this food. And so it's things like that, and it's one of the things that we've got under the Sustainable Food Charter is all around about the impact around food on the environment and ecologically. So Peter has said been attending that meeting, and it's what needs to happen next. It's all well and good having a food charter, and it's really important we have one. What's the important bit that goes alongside that is two things. One, having an action plan under each of the points, and the environmental impact is one of those action plans we need to look at around food. And secondly, ensuring that we get people to sign up and kind of buy into it from all sectors, whether it's businesses, whether it's individuals, whether it's voluntary sector. It's all that coming together. And so whilst we've kind of been putting that together, the big thing that we're going to be wanting a lot of input in is around that action plan in terms of how we actually make the food charter a reality. And I'll shut up there. You're on mute, Peter.
I said, oh, bloody hell, just for the record. Fabulous, Paul. Thank you very much. Just one thing that occurs to me, I don't know if either of you mentioned it, that the food waste is going to have to go into food caddies when it comes to the council collecting things. So it's going to have to set up a food caddy system, which is going to create a challenge and be quite expensive for the council. But from what I understand, it to be very good in lots of ways, because food emits lots of CO2 equivalent, and putting it into food caddies and putting it straight into some sort of biodigest system will help us a lot. But that's a challenge that the council will have to face up to. Now, I'm asking for questions. Could people please either say hat or ask for a question? We've got one from Rosemary.
Peter,
Rosemary, do you want to? Yeah.
We did get a question beforehand from Liz, Elizabeth. So
Okay.
do you want me to kind of go to that one first, because we received that one before?
I want you to manage as efficiently as you can.
Yeah. So I can read. I don't know, Elizabeth. I don't know whether you want to read out. I'm happy to read out Elizabeth's questions because I know she submitted them. So.
I'd rather hear Liz than you, Greg. Don't take that personally.
Yeah.
That's fine. Do you want to read them out, Elizabeth?
You can do it if you like. No, the first one was about all the plastics that we collect. What happens to them? How are they recycled? There was mention about bottles, plastic bottles, but what about all the other plastics that I think they're sorted out, aren't they? And then they're, what happens to them? Would anybody know?
Kierra, do you want to have a stab at that?
So I could answer broadly, but I have to say part of the problem with the way that recycling works around the UK is that every council does things differently, and also councils themselves tend to do things differently over time. So if on the question of plastic bottles, by the way, a deposit return scheme tends to be about trying to get back very particular kinds of plastic that are easier to reuse or recycle for particular products. But it's also a way, the idea of it is it's trying to get a kind of plastic that we tend to use outside of the house. So a lot of the problem with plastic bottles is people will throw them away in a bin on the street or litter them. Whereas a deposit return scheme gives people a financial incentive. You get, 20p or something for putting one in the slot. So it can mean you get a higher quality of plastic. You get that plastic you wouldn't normally get recycled, and you can do better things with it. However, on the subject of where plastic normally goes and on where your council take it if it goes from outside your house, it very much depends. The UK used to send a lot of our plastic that was suitable for recycling over to the EU. Obviously, we're not able to do that in quite the same way at the moment. So we either have to get the EU to accept plastic shipments, we have to set up our own ways of recycling those plastics, which means building more plastic recycling plants, or we have to find other things to do. And one of the government proposals is we use incinerators to produce energy from burning many things. In general, and particularly in the case of plastics, it's not a good idea or something we should be doing, but we do know councils will occasionally send really unsuitable goods for incineration, or will think incineration is a solution when it isn't. And of course, the final thing we have done in the past is we sent a lot of our waste abroad where it isn't really recyclable to places like China, who have historically accepted it and disposed of it for us, mainly in landfill. Now China and a number of other countries have refused to do that. So to be honest, if it's not going to a plastic recycling plant right now, hopefully the very best it will be doing is going to landfill.
Yes, I have heard that a lot of plastic and other waste goes abroad, and it's just dumped, and it becomes an environmental hazard there. No, not here. But I have also heard, I saw a program. It was to do with Nottingham. They collect the waste and they sort it, and they incinerate. They incinerate what they can't recycle, and it's turned into energy, as you said. And I thought that's a good idea. Why doesn't every town do that here instead of sending it abroad?
I'm going to come in on that. Basically, let's not talk about incineration. There are lots of problems in Derby, as people will know, and the giant incinerator that they tried to to establish has got lots of problems, and it's on freeze. I think that project has been abandoned, but there's lots and lots of debates about incineration, and I know I won't go out with my own position on this now. Just that let's move on from the incineration debate. Derby tries to sort out its plastics if it goes in the blue bins. Sometimes if it goes in the black bin and there's heavy plastics, it is sorted out. But because there's no incineration process, no major incineration process, it depends upon which depot we send it to and how they sort it out. So there's a question from Rosemary, which is about what can we do really. Rosemary, do you think we can leave that to the end? Because I think that's how we should end a meeting. And if we take up some of the, is that all right?
We can, Peter. I did ask another one actually. I can't remember what it was.
What was the other one, please?
Oh yeah, I think Paul might have answered. It was about community growing spaces. And Paul has come back. I've lost where he said it now. We're discussing the use of allotments and they want to look at growing spaces. But I think it's a really good thing for a community to have a garden, because not only does it help people source food cheaply, but it also builds that community spirit, which I think, you know, does exist in Derby, but I think everywhere could do with a little bit more community spirit, particularly at this moment.
Obviously, clearly, and one of the things that the community hub believes strongly, that it's the community which can make the real difference. And the councils that have made a real difference have been the ones which have been able to help pull in the energies of the community and the ideas. So that's why the community hub has been set up. I'm looking at the next question. I've got one from Dave Clasby. I don't know if that's, oh no, I've got one from Hillary. Let's take Hillary, if that's all right.
Dave was first, by the way, so.
No.
Yeah.
Not according to my list, but anyway, I don't care.
That's all right.
Dave first. Dave first. Should we say men first? Dave, are you there, please? Hello. Can't hear you.
I don't think his mic's working. Oh, yeah. We'll come back. We'll go to him.
Okay, Hillary, your mic was very faint, Dave. I could read out your question for you, but we'll do Hillary first while I'm struggling. Hillary, are you there,
Peter.
please?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes. I'd just like to ask Kierra a question, if I may. Kierra, I work for a local authority. I work for Derby City Council, like as Peter does. I'm concerned about, you know, when we're talking about biodiversity net gain, that it may come down to local authorities to deliver this on behalf of developers. You know, where there are developments within a city, for instance, and this is actually occurring actually in Derby, that we as a city council are being asked to deliver the net gain on open spaces for them, because obviously there isn't space often on sites to deliver those net gains. Now, also there's a requirement to manage and maintain these improvements going forward, and you mentioned about the 30 years sort of limit, and that you wanted this to be in perpetuity. I just wonder how this, well, this will be proved, you know, in perpetuity. Who will monitor this going forward, and also, you know, whether developers, and I very much doubt they will, whether they'll pay for that going forward, because I'm assuming that they'll pay a commuted sum for a certain period of time, as they do for adoption of open space in cities, but it'll be the same for net gain. So I am concerned, because as much as I think this is fantastic, I do feel that it'll put a burden on local authorities to deliver this net gain and manage and maintain it, to add to obviously the green spaces that we already maintain. So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Hillary.
Kierra, would you like to come in? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think actually that is partly why the bill is phrased as it is right now with the 30-year restriction, is partly because of the concerns you've raised, both about how you guarantee anything beyond that, and also who pays for it. In terms of who pays for it, I mean, the bill doesn't necessarily set that out, and it doesn't necessarily set out any details or enough detail as to who would be responsible for providing the net gain. But I suppose the way I kind of would envisage it working, and the way we've spoken about it working with the civil service, is if you think about something like the Section 106 requirement, and sorry, for people who don't work in a council, the Section 106 requirement is like when you build a bunch of houses somewhere, and you're a private developer, you either have to put some affordable housing within it, or you have to in some other way ensure that there's more affordable housing locally. So often developers will just try and give the council money to avoid putting affordable housing within these developments. And often there is a discussion there about how much money is enough money to spend to offset all the gains of the developer. And I think there'd be lots of really similar issues would come up here. However, I think that there are ways in which Section 106 and other payments like that have worked, and there are ways in which it could work, and it definitely should be. And the bill sets it out to be that biodiversity gain is a condition of planning permission. So it should very much, the ball should be in the developer's court, and they should be required to set out what they are going to do and what funds they are going to provide and what support they're going to provide for that going forward. Whether ministers do indeed set that out in secondary legislation after the bill is going to be a bit of another matter. But I think there's definitely the potential for it to work like a better version of things we've already tried. And then in terms of the kind of 30 years to perpetuity thing, I think I really agree. You know, it's not something we want local authorities to be saddled with. But at the same time, the issue here is partly that biodiversity net gain sites can be listed, so not everywhere would be listed. This would be about toss-ups occasionally between needing to develop in ways that might have environmental impacts, and then trying to mitigate those impacts and ensure good biodiversity. And I think there's a role for developers to play there in explaining how these changes are going to be bedded in. I think this is the key, bedded in within 30 years, so that no one needs to be actively paying attention to them in 31 years and 32 and 33. I think partly the reason that we need to do so much upkeep on some of the net gain that we look at now is because it requires upkeep, because actually it's not very well suited to where we put it or to what we do. So we plant the wrong trees in the wrong place, and we wonder why people water them every day and they don't grow.
Good, thank you. I think I've just seen Dave's first question. Dave, is your microphone working?
Is my microphone working?
It is.
Well, that's great then.
Could you ask the one about the food charger, please, to Paul? And we'll come back to you later for the other questions.
Well, I was actually just going to pick up a couple of points that Kierra had mentioned.
With pleasure. But
all right. Okay. So, Kierra, just to put some context, I'm an area manager for Sustrans in the East Midlands, and I'm a technical lead around air quality. So that sort of like is what I was just going to pick up on. Really interesting about the ongoing 30-year maintenance requirement, because an unintended consequence of putting maintenance requirements is that councils often try and avoid increasing, which is the point I think Hillary's making, their liability. So I think one of the, so for example, in our area of work with building walking and cycling routes, councils will often go, nah, I'm not going to build that cycle path for you because the money to build it is there, but there's no ongoing maintenance funding. So what I'd be interested in is your thoughts on how we actually overcome that unintended consequence of actually councils going, no, we're not doing it because the money's not there to match that, because it is a liability. And making something a condition of planning. Again, we've actually had a recent example in Derby where a cycle route was a condition of the planning, And unless we change national planning legislation, and I know that it's just finished, but obviously you had the National Planning Policy Framework finished a consultation on Saturday. Well, the sort of like interim consultation. It's planning that we've got to get right here, because that condition was just overridden. The developers basically said, actually, we can't deliver it. And the council, because all the condition means is it goes back to a planning committee, and then the council can actually, the councillors can actually change their mind. So it's around that aspect of regulatory framework that I wanted to just get your opinion. Derby is a designated city for poor air quality. It was one of the original cities that first came up as having an issue around poor air quality. And that's only been, as you know, because Client Earth, being the amazing organisation they are, fought, dragged the government kicking and screaming through the European courts, but they are still failing to deliver real change on the ground because they've pushed this down to local authorities. So, for example, Derby's response, part of Derby's response to improving its air quality is to remove a bus, taxi and cycle lane in the city centre to increase capacity for cars. And what I'm interested in, that's on Friegate for those people that know the city. You're now going to have a 2-lane of motorised traffic going past the Greyhound pub, rather than having that priority bus, cycle and taxi lane going into the city centre. And that's because they're effectively moving the inner ring road from Stafford Street to Uttoxeter Old Road, where there happens to be a nursery, which is great with poor air quality. But we are very, very concerned about the weakness of the regulatory framework, in particular, given this government and previous governments have tried to wriggle out of doing anything about air quality because they just see it as so challenging, because effectively that is about reducing the use of cars and lorries and vans. You've had all motorised transport in our cities. So I just wondered what your best guess is as to what you think the regulatory framework will effectively look like if the Environment Bill goes through as it is, because it's very worrying. Sorry, there's a lot in that.
There was loads. This is the most interesting meeting I've come to in a really long time. So just on the kind of end of the net gain and who pays for stuff thing and planning and all of that, I should firstly say that I'm not an expert, but we do have a planning team who definitely are, and they have shared all the concerns that you raised and that people I can see in the chat have raised about the lack of join up between the biodiversity net gain provisions in the Environment Bill and all the planning policy. And in fact, we're kind of concerned that the government might bring in a lot of planning policy via the Environment Bill at some point during its progress. That hasn't happened yet, but it still kind of could happen. So we're interested to see how all those things fit together, and in fact how they start to fit in with other planning changes that are planned, and with the Freeport's development as well. So there's going to be a lot of issues there, and I know that we're running out of time, so I kind of won't go into loads of it, apart from saying in terms of who will enforce and who pays for it. I'm going to say we would always say, and I would always say, that this is about the developers paying, and this is about ensuring that that, you know, our natural, I hate calling things natural capital, but our natural capital is not kind of used by other people to develop their own financial capital. You need to be giving back to the land, and you need to be giving back to people, and you need to be ensuring that your overall impact is positive, and it can't only be financial, it also has to be in terms of putting back into the community and other resources that you're using. And we need to work out a way to do that. But in terms of who will enforce, I think this comes into the air quality point as well, and it comes back to probably a much longer discussion, definitely a much longer discussion than we can have tonight, but one I'm really happy to follow up on, around the strength of the watchdog, but also how judicial review will function in the future, how environmental review, which is a completely new legal process that the Environment Bill brings in for the Office of Environmental Protection to use, how that will function in the future. I have several PowerPoints that attempt to explain these things in better graphics than DEFRA can, if anyone is interested. And on air particularly, we ran a webinar in conjunction with Lee Day, the law firm, at the beginning of March. And I think that the notes are freely available online, so I'm happy to share a link to those. But someone from Client Earth actually did a presentation there, and one of the things they talked about was looking at the case they made about air quality based on the Air Quality Standards Regulations 2010. And now I've started naming legislation. I'm really going to not try and go into too much more detail, but basically saying how much weaker their case would be if it was based on the Environment Bill. And that is partly because the Environment Bill doesn't require that any of the things government does around air have minimum content in them, that the plans government make are actually deliverable, that government reports on actually the steps it's taking, and then crucially takes the steps rather than just reports on them, and that the OEP is strong enough to then enforce if government doesn't act on those air quality plans like they could in the European levels. So I mean, that's me summarizing her kind of 15-20 minute presentation into a minute there. But I think the fact that Client Earth are really concerned about how the air quality regulation will work in the future, and if it would enable them to do the same thing again, I think should make us all pretty worried.
Thank you. I'd like the Community Climate Hub. I think we're going to have monthly or 6 weekly meetings on various issues, and air quality is obviously going to be a big issue in the future. There's a question about food, but I'm not going to ask Paul to answer this now. It's about diet. So Paul could put up something maybe in the chat, but also when he has a chance to come back at the end, if you could talk about food and diet, Paul. What I'd like to do is to extend the meeting to 8:15 at latest, and pull in Kate now, who's put up a question. Kate, are you still there? And if you could just put your question, please, and then we could
sorry,
also talk about.
So I was asking about community growing spaces specifically. It's really about vegetable growing rather than orchards. It's something that gets asked a lot to me from doing stuff in the ward that I live in. I've not known of any volunteer-run community spaces, which often seems to be what's being asked for, that have succeeded for more than a couple of years at a time without individuals having their own specific space to grow, like allotments. And I know Eric's referred to Hannah Fields, but I believe that does have paid employees. So it was asking, would community growing spaces have paid employees to maintain them? Simply because or are there ones that other people know about that don't, but that do work for multiple years running?
Thank you. Kate's active in the community hub. Does anybody, do either of you want to try to answer that question?
I don't have a problem with ones that do have paid employees. I hasten to add, it's just a question I keep being asked of, can we have a community vegetable garden? And my reaction as somebody who grows vegetables is, that's a lot of work. Who's going to water them? And then also I know other people who've had problems getting people to actually pick the vegetables because, oh, they're not mine. So it's that administration.
So I don't think we've got an easy answer for that one, Kate. So,
okay.
I mean, the only thing I would say is, sorry, Friends of the Earth have supported a number of projects that we call 10 times greener around the country over the last couple of years. And a load of people did set up very, very small pocket community gardens where there was some growing on those. And they set up regular kind of community gardens. None of those had paid employees in the beginning. A couple of them have now fundraised for paid members of staff after they operated for a year or 18 months. And I suppose maybe that is our learning, is actually it is very much possible to do it without paid employees, and with enough kind of community support it's probably possible to maintain it. But it does seem that there is a point in time where having someone with a bit more expertise and a bit more time seems to be the way a lot of our groups have been really successful have gone. So
good. Kate, while you're still there, could you just talk about the survey, please? why we're doing it.
Oh, right. So Peter and the sort of group that have been coming along to the more regular hub meetings have put together a survey just to try and canvass for opinion and let people know that we're here. So up at the top of the chat, there's a link to the survey. It's quite a simple and fairly short one. It would be wonderful if everyone could copy the link and complete the survey and share it with absolutely anybody you know. Anybody within Derby is obviously more valuable for our data. Anybody outside Derby is fine too. It will ask whether you are in or outside Derby. And it would just be great to have some opinions so that we've got some information to take to the council, and so that we've got a sort of a weight of numbers of people supporting different measures for climate change. And anybody who'd like to get more involved and have more detailed discussions about any aspects of changing the city and community action towards the climate, or any ideas they have, that would be wonderful to hear about those.
And thank you. And one of the things I'm very keen on is for us to try to develop an alternative vision for the city. I don't want to fill in the spaces, but I think that's a real driver. We should have a comfortable city where there's not much travel, there's lots of communal activities and so on. So that's the last question of the survey. It's, you know, it's got quantitative and it's got qualitative data in it. Kim, do you want to just say a little bit about the community action and the survey, if you're there, please?
Will, just unmuting because it's quite loud here. It's evening and I've got grandson, daughter, hubby. It's like a full and loud house. Yeah, I guess from our perspective, we want to be able to get the survey out far and wide from a community action perspective, and try and make sure all of the environmental groups, as well as voluntary community groups and the volunteers and the people that are working for with them as well, to fill in, so we can get a really good picture of what people think about the environment, what people think they can do, and also how they want to get involved, and what they think is important. And I think that actually, to some degree for us, the response to the pandemic and the good neighbour work and the locality work that we've been doing over the last 9-10 months has showed us that our communities in Derby really want to be proactive in supporting each other, and you know, I think we've had something like 4,000 people coming forward to support other people in their communities, and we've kept that local. It's been, what can you do for yourself? What can you do with the help of neighbours and friends? And all of our volunteers and our and our sort of people getting involved have been doing that at a very local level, and that's what we've been promoting throughout, because at the end of the day, it's about creating community resilience and working within the networks that you've got there. So really happy to be able to support Food for Thought, the whole move to sort of sustainable growing and looking at local producing, as well as those other pieces. So from our perspective, want to be able to just to support that and what everybody's doing, really. It's probably all I need to say, Peter. And if anyone does think of anything or wants any support around groups, organisations or volunteering, please do get in touch.
Fantastic. There's quite a few questions, but there's also answers in the chat. So if anybody's got a burning question, otherwise I'll get, please, Greg, if you've noticed a burning question or anybody else wants to, what I'm going to suggest is that Paul takes up some of the issues, especially about diet, and then I'm going to ask Kierra to come back, and then we'll come back with, then we'll finish up with some announcements, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things on diets. One that we could have said is naturally through kind of all the work we're doing, we wanted to ensure that we meet people's cultural needs as best as we can. So one of the food banks through the whole pandemic has been a specific halal food bank. We also work closely with the West Indian Community Centre and a few other places like that. We also do things around diet, around people's specific health issues. So you know, we've had various things like people who are celiac, people with their, you know, soya or, you know, nut or dairy, you know, or vegan, vegetarian side of things we've naturally been looking at. And I know the point that was raised around, you know, the the whole point of, I guess, what we're trying to do is provide options. I don't think we're in the place to try and dictate what people can or can't eat. You know, I know obesity is a massive issue, but again, we can provide information and share people. We can't, you know, we can't start dictating that people should or shouldn't eat things. And I think it also, you know, is the same around, you know, the question was specifically around, you know, meat. You know, I think naturally we want to promote that, you know, there's a whole host of issues, not just the animals themselves, but also the damage to the rainforests and all the different things that go on across the globe, that we need to highlight the importance of sustainable and healthy, you know, food. But again, it's our role, you know, it's about highlighting that and encouraging things, not trying to tell people what they should or shouldn't do.
Thank
Hopefully.
you. That's lovely. I haven't asked Sonia, you run a food bank. Would you unmute and just reiterate, no, just either reinforce or differ with Paul about your observations about running the food bank and diets, if you're still there.
Oh no,
I can't see.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I still have no camera. I tried several times. In any case, I agree with Paul. So, yeah, and we've been running since before the pandemic, so we've a lot to compare it to. But I agree with Paul's position.
Sonia runs it from the Mandela Centre, which is in the centre of Normanton, and it's really important for us to pick up these different experiences and to relate to people. And I wish Sonia was chairing it, this meeting.
I mean, probably the other thing to say, if it's okay, Peter, is part of the reason we wanted to move towards community shops is to bring a bit more availability, because again, one of the things I'm conscious with, certainly within, you know, Normanton, there's a lot of you know, there's a lot of cultures within the area, and naturally we can't do food parcels for every, you know, every kind of community that is there, but through the community shops we can provide some items for a lot more communities, because it's about choice there rather than they just take what's given them in a bag. So
fabulous. Kierra, last but not least.
I suppose I might come back in just to answer Rosemary's question from earlier around maybe what to do on the environment bill. I realise I'm just watching your faces to see if anyone rolls their eyes at this, but you know, it is a bill, and so one of the most useful things you can be doing here is to be speaking to your MP and working out if there are areas where they have an interest in engaging, and if so, if they might be willing to support amendments to the bill. And I think what's important here is that a number of the amendments, so for example, the plastics amendment that we've been supporting recently is tabled by Chris Loader, who's a Conservative from the South Coast. It was supported by a number of people from a number of different parties. If you look at the air quality amendments, they're being tabled by, one was by Neil Parish, one was by Ruth Jones, who's Labour. So again, you know, across the political divides. So I think that if you can work out, you know, is it air quality? Is it plastic? Is it issues about governance? Is it issues about kind of the scrutiny of the regulations that are being made, or about kind of the quality of legal enforcement? If there's an issue there you can use to get your MP engaged and get them to send you, and this is the key, anything but the standard party response from their own party, anything but that demonstrates they're engaging, and means that they might talk about these issues a bit more, but also support an amendment in Parliament. And then, crucially, when the bill is passed, will care enough to keep harassing government. Where is the secondary legislation? Where are the targets? When are you going to bring in all these things that came out of the bill? How is the Office of Environmental Protection working? Let us see the complaints, let us hear about them. that is going to be really vital too. And that doesn't actually require, you know, really radical, really anti-government MPs to rebel. It doesn't require, you know, people who are often don't toe the party line. It just requires members of parliament who are willing to say, you know what, pollution all over the shop, really dirty water, you know, climate catastrophe, all seem to be like quite bad things, and this seems like a giant flagship government bill that's meant to fix them, so why don't we make it fix them? So we've been putting together a bit of guidance for anyone who did want to follow up with their MP. So if anyone does and wants some hints, some facts, some scripts for if you fancy calling people, or, you know, in-depth legal advice and dissection of different parts of the bill, then do feel free to email me, because really happy to support anyone who wants to follow those conversations up until the bill gets through Parliament at the end of this year.
That's fabulous. We'll circulate some notes, a recording of the meeting later, and we'll also circulate your email address if